Welcome to everyone. We're so happy to see you here. We had well over, I guess, 150 sign up, but we have at least 80 some so far. And I want to talk a little bit about the League of Women Voters. You can, by the way, go to their website at any time and learn more about them. And they do have a statement of their positions on the various items they're going to be discussing today that are on the ballot, but not every one. And some they don't take positions. So what is the League of Women Voters' mission? It's a nonpartisan political organization to encourage informed and active participation in government. It works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy, and today is an example of that. The League now has fought since 1920 to improve our government and engage all Americans in the decisions that impact their lives. They operate at the national, state, and local levels through more than 800 state and local leagues in all 50 states, as well as DC, the Virgin Islands, and Hong Kong. They never endorse or oppose political parties or candidates, but they are political. Formed from the movement that secured the right to vote for women, the centerpiece of the League's efforts remain to expand participation and give a voice to all Americans. They do this at all three levels of government, engaged in both broad educational efforts as well as advocacy. Their issues are grounded in our respective history to make democracy work for all Americans. The League of Women Voters of Humboldt County was formed in 1956 and is one of 800 state and local leagues comprising a vast grassroots lobby corps. It is a grassroots citizen network directed by the consensus of its members. The League's board of directors and members are hardworking volunteers dedicated to improving our democracy. And we have 6 of them here today who have studied each of the issues and are ready to present them to you. And I now introduce Nancy Kay, who has been wonderful in terms of the last 3 times we've done this in gathering together her members to do this presentation. And I thank you and introduce Nancy Kay.
Thank you, Jane. And you are 100% right about the mission of the League. And one of the things we want to make a distinction about today is, yes, you can go on the website and see some of the pros or the positions that the League has taken on these propositions. I have not yet done so. And right now, this part of the mission is about education, simply education. So any reflection on the League's thoughts on the whether the proponents or opponents, we're not going to focus on. We are focusing on a balanced pros and cons. So truly, I haven't even read them myself. I'm here today. I'm Nancy Kay. I'm here today with League members Judy, Bennett, and there's so many of you, I don't know whether she should bother waving, but Kay Escarda, Byrd Lochtie, Amy Moffat, and Maggie Augustine. So here we have the propositions. There are 12 on the ballot. In 1911, California became the 10th state to adopt the initiative process. There's 26 states and the District of Columbia that have some variations of the initiative process. It has been disparaged by some and applauded by others, but no other state, apart from Oregon, has used the initiative process as much as California has. It is part of our political landscape here. So what do we have on the ballot this year? The 12 propositions include an initiative statutes and one referendum. These basically deal with changing or creating laws. An initiative statute, strictly from the people. Then we also have some constitutional amendments on the ballot. We have one that is an initiative amendment that came strictly from the people. And we have 4 legislative amendments which were suggested by the legislature, but indeed they still have to go through the petition process.
Nancy, this is Kim. I'm sorry to interrupt. You haven't actually started your slideshow, so we're seeing the presentation not in the format I think you would prefer.
Well, I went to share screen and it is there, so let me problem solve this.
It is there.
That's how Nancy wants to present it.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead then. My apologies.
Oh, okay. So you do have the chart.
Right.
Oh,
We
okay.
do.
All right. So listed on the chart are the 12 propositions, and they are described as either statute, laws, or constitutional amendments. And so this is what we have on the ballot. Our first proposition is Proposition 14, and it will be discussed by Byrd Lochtie.
Thank you, Nancy. Proposition 14, the California Stem Cell Research, Treatments, and Cures Initiative of 2020 is an initiative statute, a law proposed by the people. It authorizes state bonds of $5.5 billion to conduct stem cell research and other medical research, including training, research facility construction, and administrative costs. $1.5 billion would be dedicated to brain-related diseases, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other brain and mental nervous system diseases and conditions. It would build on the work from Prop 71 in 2004 that gave researchers the right to conduct stem cell research. It appropriates general fund money for repayment. The fiscal impact increased state costs to repay about $260 million per year for about 30 years. No payments are due for 5 years when payments are estimated to be less than $5 per person annually. A yes vote will allow the sale of $5.5 billion in bonds, primarily for stem cell research and the development of medical treatments. A no vote will not allow the state to sell that $5.5 billion in bonds. Proponents of Proposition 14 say, Proposition 71, ending this year, has already provided 92 FDA-approved clinical trials for chronic diseases and conditions, as well as 2,900 medical discoveries that have benefited patients. It will build on the success of Prop 71, accelerating medical breakthroughs out of the lab and into clinical trials to help patients. Collaboration with the National Institute of Health has been very beneficial. Proposition 14 will contribute to economic recovery by providing new revenue and generating jobs, making treatments more affordable and available to patients. There are no state repayments for 5 years. The cost per person when payments start in 2026 is estimated to be less than $5 annually. Supporters include the University of California, several Nobel Prize winners, and about 70 patient advocate groups. The California Association of Realtors has supported Proposition 14 with $15 million. The opponents of Proposition 14 say California cannot afford $5.5 billion in new bonds, which becomes $7.8 billion with interest and will lead to higher taxes. They say they question the integrity, management, and independence of the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, formed for of Prop 71, calling it a state bureaucracy. They say it does not address the law of Prop 71, which did not bring money to the state as promised and did not provide any approved therapies. Grants went to private entities in other states. Institutions such as the National Institute of Health can do a better job. Groups with arguments against Proposition 14 are the Institute of Medicine, the Little Hoover Commission, and the Center for Society and Genetics in Berkeley. No large donations by opponents of Proposition 14 have been recorded. Are there any questions in the chat?
There are no questions in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, then we'll move on to Prop 15, which Amy Moffat will be delivering.
All right, thank you, Nancy and Byrd. So Prop 15 is an initiative constitutional amendment. So that was put on the ballot by petition signatures. And it reads, increases funding sources for public schools, community colleges, and local government services by changing tax assessment of commercial and industrial property. The fiscal impact could be, if we say yes to this is that it would increase property taxes on commercial properties worth more than $3 million, providing $6.5 billion to $11.5 billion in new funding to local governments and schools. So this measure would require commercial and industrial land and buildings to be taxed based on how much they could be sold for instead of their original purchase price. Housing and agricultural land would not change and would continue to be taxed on their original purchase price. So owners with $3 million or less worth of commercial land and buildings would not be affected, and they would be continued to be taxed based on original purchase price. This measure also includes a change in tax on business equipment less than $500,000. So there would be no tax on those items. So businesses that meet certain rules and have 50 or fewer employees would not have to pay taxes on business equipment. So supporters argue that this closes property tax loopholes benefiting wealthy corporations. The top 10% of California's most valuable non-residential commercial properties account for 92% of this measure's new revenues. Prop 15 funds can go directly to education, and state politicians can't take it away. Opponents say that Prop 15 repeals taxpayer protections that were voted in Prop 13 a while ago, which capped property taxes and limited increases annually, and that provided a certainty in your annual tax bill. They also say that this doesn't stop the tax from being passed on to small business tenants with skyrocketing rents. And I'm going to stop there because I do think there are going to be questions on that.
There are questions in the chat. One is, was Prop 71 intended to provide therapies? If yes, did it? If it didn't, why?
All right, I don't know what Prop 71 is referring to.
And I think
that's,
that might be for Byrd.
14.
Okay.
Yes. Do you want me to answer now or wait till the end?
Let's wait.
Why don't we let Amy finish and then revisit you, Byrd? That's a good idea.
Okay, I'll hold that question to the end then. Another question is, would the aqua farm be considered agriculture?
I don't know the specifics on that one. I could look that up and try to have an answer by the end. But it's pretty clear that agriculture land is not included in this tax.
And then another question is, since it excludes agriculture, why are we being inundated with flyers and Facebook ads by farmers against it?
That's a really good question. So there is, like, what they have found is that the farmers are feeling there is a loophole in this, and that any new buildings that they're going to build is going to be taxed. So even though the original intent was to protect agriculture, they're feeling like they're not being protected. So there is, and I can have some language at the end that talks about the state actually admitted that their intention didn't quite make the full wording. And then I see something else. There are numerous businesses that express concern that their rents will skyrocket on the property they rent for their businesses. This proposition addressed that. No, that is one of the arguments against this, is that since it's going after the large corporations, that the corporations would just trickle down their increase in tax to their renters. And does it raise taxes when you transfer property to, that is a different, does it raise taxes when you transfer property to relatives? That is a different proposition, because this proposition is only commercial land and it protects residential properties.
I think that's it.
Okay, Byrd, can you respond to the question that's in the chat about your proposition? Or maybe Kim can read it to you?
Please.
Sure. It asks, was Prop 71 intended to provide therapies? If yes, did it? If it didn't, why?
It provided trials for things, and it also provided, they called it new developments that helped patients. And I don't know whether that was developments in medications or in equipment, or probably both. There were 2,900 of those. So there were a lot of things from Prop 71. And that's what the proponents of this are saying. They want to continue that. There were quite a few trials. I think it was 92 trials, clinical trials that that came from this research, and they want to continue that as well.
Okay, shall we move on to Prop 16? Kay Escarda? Kay, are you unmuted?
Sorry, I forgot. Proposition 16 allows diversity as a factor in public employment, in education, and contracting decisions. And it's a constitutional amendment, was put on there by the legislature. Well, policies and programs commonly called affirmative action in state hiring, now this is just not private, but state functions, contracting, and in education is currently banned in the California Constitution. Proposition 16 will reverse that ban and allow public schools and other institutions to take race, ethnicity, color, national origin, and gender into consideration when admitting students to college, the hiring of public employees, and in selecting contractors in public projects. The history behind the proposition is that some 20 years, policies and programs were developed to allow and to encourage women and ethnic minorities to participate more fully in public higher education, in government, and in contracting. These programs were commonly referred to as affirmative action. Well, in 1996, an amendment to the California Constitution, Proposition 209, banned consideration of these policies and programs unless they met certain qualifications for certain exemptions. Well, since that time, the percentage of women and minorities participating under this ban has actually decreased. This proposition seeks to reverse the ban imposed by 209 and allow for programs intended to prevent discrimination consistent with state and federal law. So those in favor of Proposition 16 say that repealing Proposition 209 allows public institutions to work toward greater diversity. It expands equal opportunity for all Californians, increasing access to fair wages, good jobs, and quality schools for everyone. It fights wage discrimination and systemic racism, opening doors of opportunities for women and people of color. Proposition 16 is supported by a broad coalition of government officials, educators, minority businesses, and a number of various organizations. It gets its financial support, which totals over $9.5 million, from these government and organizations. And it has editorial support from the San Francisco Chronicle, the Mercury News, and the Los Angeles Times. So we also have the people that are opposed to Proposition 16, and they say that the politicians want to strip our Constitution of its prohibition on discrimination and preferential treatment, so-called affirmative action. Reversing 209 gives an unfair advantage to minority. And discrimination is bad, whether it benefits underprivileged people or not. The state should treat all Californians equally. They get their support, and it is opposed by several Republican elected officials, both state and national. The original sponsor of Proposition 209, Ward Connolly, and an Asian American organization gets its financial support from these groups, and that totals about $122,678 at last count. It has editorial opposition from the Wall Street Journal and the Orange County Register. Its fiscal impact is that there are no fiscal impacts in the measure because the measure does not require any changes to policies and programs. However, there could be effects depending on future choices made by the state and local entities. And those results are highly uncertain because nobody knows what they would be. Are there any questions in the chat room?
There's one question. The question, does Prop 16 mandate diversity or just allow it?
It allows it. It does not mandate it. You do have to meet federal and state equal opportunity requirements that are written into those equal opportunity for everybody. That's banned by both state and national constitutions. Excuse me. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. There is one other question in the chat that's a more general question. Nancy, would you like to have me read that now or save that to the end?
Well, go ahead. Maybe it's germane.
Okay, so it says, do these propositions require a simple majority to pass, or if taxes, a higher percentage? If so, which propositions require a higher percentage?
Well, it just requires a plurality, actually, at this point. But what we do need to know is that the requirements for the signatures on the ballot to get on the ballot are based on the number of people who voted in the past gubernatorial election. Now, to get a proposition on the ballot that's not changing the Constitution, just the law, they need to have 5% of the total votes cast for the office of governor at the last election. But if you want to change the Constitution, you're going to need 8% of the votes of that same population. And it's also important to remember, if something comes into law or into our Constitution by way of the initiative process, it is protected until, except for some amendments, the legislature can amend and do a few tweaks. But as far as its status as a law or an amendment, it has to go through the proposition process again to be undone. And you need to pay attention to how many propositions are being revisited or revisiting old statutes, old constitutional amendments. It's sort of interesting. There's a lot of history on each one of these.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Our next, we'll talk about Proposition 17 with Judy Bennett.
Thanks, Nancy. Proposition 17 is one of the easier to understand propositions on the ballot. It reads on your ballot, restores right to vote after completion of prison term. It's a constitutional amendment brought forth by the state legislature. The question is whether you believe a citizen who's completed his or her prison term but is still on parole should be allowed to vote. A yes vote allows parolees to vote. A no vote says no, they need to complete their parole before they can vote again. There would be some fiscal impact if this passes. Allowing persons on parole to vote would mean more voters, and therefore more voting materials would be needed. In California, there are about 50,000 people on parole. So there would be additional costs both to local jurisdictions and to the state. If allowed to vote, parolees would also be allowed to run for office. Proponents say parolees hold jobs, raise families, pay taxes, and contribute to society. When allowed to vote, people feel they are a part of their community and are less likely to commit crimes. 19 other states allow parolees to vote, and California should be among them. Opponents say parole is part of the punishment for committing a crime, and that parolees should prove rehabilitation before they're allowed to vote again, because half of them commit repeated crimes. And finally, allowing parolees to vote would deny justice to their victims. So in conclusion, a yes vote allows parolees to vote, and a no vote denies them that privilege. Any questions?
There are no questions in the chat on that proposition.
Okay, thank you.
There is one to, oh yes. Who is pro and con for that proposition?
Let me look at that, look it up and get back to you, okay?
I think in general, that seems to be, people are asking who is pro and who is con, or what groups support each proposition as well, or are against them.
Okay, and thank you, Judy. Amy Moffat will speak to us about Prop 18.
Great, thanks. I am going over Prop 18, which is a legislative constitutional amendment. It was put on the ballot by the legislature, not by signatures. So there were a couple of assembly members who sponsored this. It says amends California Constitution to permit 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special elections if they will turn 18 by the next general election and be otherwise eligible to vote. So the fiscal impact is that if we vote yes on this, is that it would increase statewide county costs, likely between several hundreds of thousands of dollars and $1 million every 2 years, and have an increased one-time cost to the state of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this one's pretty simple. Basically, would only allow 17-year-olds to vote who would be 18 by the next general election. I do want to say though, it does affect whether registered voters who run for elective office. This measure would result in 17-year-olds who turn 18 by the next general election to run for elective office if they meet all other existing eligibility requirements for elective office. The supporters argue that this boosts youth civic engagement in our elections and help create more lifelong participants in the most fundamental process of democracy. They say that youth are extremely underrepresented in our electoral process, despite the fact that they are heavily impacted by the policies created by those elected. And studies show that voting is habit forming. Once an individual votes in an election, they are more likely to do so again. The opponents say that real life experience with earning a living and paying taxes is vital for voting, that the 17-year-olds have no frame of reference to make the vital decisions voters make for themselves and all other members of society when they vote, and that 17-year-olds are minors for several reasons. They are a captive audience to teachers, making them vulnerable to one-sided influence. So the groups who support this, let me see. It is assembly members and the California League of Conservation Voters support this, and who are against this is the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and Election Integrity Project California. So just to summarize, a yes vote means that the state constitution will be amended to permit 17-year-olds who will be at least 18-year-olds and otherwise eligible to vote at the time of the next general election. They would be allowed to vote in any primary or special election that occurs before the next general election. A no vote means that nothing will change and only voters age 18 and older and otherwise eligible to vote can vote. questions?
There is one question in the chat. It says, why does the legislature put props on the ballot instead of deciding the issue by a vote in the legislature?
I'm going to let Nancy answer that.
Well, first of all, the legislators are sending it out to the people to sign. I haven't read anything on it. I think that they sense a way to get it passed through the initiative process rather than just using the legislative process. So yeah, they do still have to go out and get petitions. Even if the legislature composes it, or a legislator composes it, it still has to go through the Attorney General's office to be vetted for constitutionality as much as they can do. And then it does go to petitions for voters. So my best guess is that's the way they think it can get passed.
If I could, Nancy, I believe that constitutional amendments have to be approved by the voters.
This one is an amendment, and it does have to be approved by the voters. That's true. But if the legislature wants something, a law passed, they can still go through they can still compose it. So, and the referendums are basically that process. So specifically to the constitutional amendments, Byrd, I'm sorry, you were 100% better answer than mine. Any more questions?
No more questions in the chat.
Okay, and now we'll go back to Byrd and talk about Prop 19.
Thank you, Nancy. Proposition 19 is a legislative constitutional amendment which would be added to the Constitution. The ballot title is Changes Certain Property Tax Rules. It defines eligible homeowners as seniors, severely disabled, families, and victims of wildfires or natural disasters, allowing them to transfer tax assessments with an adjustment for a more expensive new primary residence anywhere in the state within 2 years of the sale. It will reassess at market value inherited homes not used as primary residences by the new owner, closing a loophole that can benefit wealthy heirs who use the property for income purposes. It also establishes the California Fire Response Fund. The fiscal impact. The legislative analyst suggests that local governments and schools could gain millions of dollars of property tax revenue, which could grow to hundreds of millions of dollars over time. It also acknowledges that local governments may have additional costs to implement the changes. A yes vote will allow this measure to be added to the Constitution, and new rules will apply for transfer and sales of property for the defined eligible homeowners. A no vote will not allow this measure to be added to the Constitution, keeping the current rules in the tax code for these same eligible groups. No change will be made for inherited properties. Proponents of Proposition 19 say it limits property taxes for eligible homeowners and removes restrictions on the location of a new primary residence if they need to move closer to family or medical care or replace or repair a home damaged by wildfire without fear of increased taxes. It would close the loophole exploited by investors and heirs who use the property for income purposes. They cite cases of politicians who have taken advantage of this loophole. They say it provides funding dedicated to fire protection and medical response. It enjoys bipartisan support. And they emphasize that Prop 19 protects the rights of homeowners under Proposition 13. Supporters of Proposition 19 are a diverse group of firefighters, seniors and disability rights groups, wildfire victims, and family farmers. The California Association of Realtors and their PAC, the National Association of Realtors, and the California Coalition of Firefighters supported Proposition 19 with over $15.7 million. The opponents of Proposition 19 say this is an attempt by Sacramento politicians and real estate special interests to raise property taxes by removing voter-approved protections of Proposition 58 and Proposition 193 from the Constitution. It would force the reassessment of inherited property unless it is used as the new owner's principal residence within 1 year, eliminating the earlier Proposition 58. It would force the sale of a family business because of increased taxes. Opponents also say the same provisions of Proposition 19 were rejected in Proposition 5 in 2018 by the voters. They say Proposition 19 is not necessary and that it is a major hit on the ability of parents in California to take care of their kids. Listing arguments against Proposition 19 are the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers League and some Republicans and Democrats in the legislature. No large donations have been recorded against Proposition 19. Are there any questions?
It doesn't look like there are any questions in the chat.
Thank you.
Wasn't there a question addressed to Amy about Prop 15 that really should have been to this one, an early question?
No, that was Proposition 14. It was
Okay.
14. We're doing that later.
There
Okay.
was,
Yeah.
It was for Prop 71, and that has to do with Prop 14 is 71. So I can do that now, or I can do it at the end.
No, whichever, that's fine. I just thought there was a hanging question. Okay. Thank you, Byrd. And now Maggie Gordon is going to talk to us about Prop 20.
Thank you, Nancy. Proposition 20 is an initiative statute put on the ballot by petition signatories. It is also known as the Criminal Sentencing, Parole, and DNA Initiative. It would limit access to the parole program established for nonviolent offenders who have completed the full term of their primary offense by eliminating eligibility for certain offenses. It would reclassify more crimes as violent, reclassify some misdemeanors as wobblers and thus a possibility of becoming a felony. It would create 2 more crime categories, serial theft and organized retail crime. The fiscal impact would be an increase in state and local correctional, court, and law enforcement costs, likely in the tens of millions of dollars annually, depending upon implementation. A yes vote would mean that people who commit certain theft-related crimes could receive increased penalties. Additional factors would have to be considered for early release, and law enforcement would be required to collect DNA from adults convicted of certain misdemeanors. A no vote means that penalties for people who commit certain theft-related crimes would not increase. There would be no change in the early release process from prison early. Law enforcement would continue to collect DNA samples from adults only if they are arrested for a felony or required to register as a sex offender or arsonist. The proponents feel that this proposition closes a loophole in the law that now allows convicted child molesters, sexual predators, and others convicted of violent crimes to be released from prison early. It would expand DNA collection to solve more serious crimes, and it would strengthen sanctions against habitual thieves. Many public officials, safety leaders, business leaders, and citizens support this proposition, and aggregate contributions are over $3 million. As for the opponents, they feel that this is a prison spending scam. California already has severe sentences for serious crimes, and it feels it would divert money from more important programs such as rehabilitation, schools, mental health, and homelessness. The public safety leader, the ACLU of California, and Californians Against the Prison Spending Scam are the opponents, and the aggregate contributions are over $7 million. Are there any questions?
I do not see any questions in the chat about
Okay.
this proposition. And then the questions that are in the chat for propositions that we've previously already talked about, I'm holding those over to the very end, if that works for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you, Maggie. Kay Escarda will talk about Prop 21.
This time I remembered to unmute myself. Proposition 21 reads that it expands local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. And there's a couple of important words in here, and that's local governments. It only applies to local governments and whether they want to enact rent control, and it just applies to residential property. The fiscal impact effect is that state and local governments get their revenues from 3 different sources: the personal income tax, property taxes, and retail sales taxes. And these might all be impacted by this proposition. The state collects the personal taxes on income, including rents received, and local governments collect property and retail sales taxes. If localities expand controls, it could take several effects, according to the legislative analyst. Revenue could go down if landlords sell to private owners, and rental property values could go down if potential landlords would not pay as much for the new properties. Some landlords would receive less rental income. However, some renters would pay less for rent and would therefore have more to spend on retail goods, increasing the retail sales tax. So it would be kind of a shift. Fewer renters may not want to move because their rents could increase. So depending on local government choices, the measures would likely reduce state and local revenues over time in the range of from very little to tens of millions of dollars per year, according to the LAO, and depending how many local governments institute rental control. The history behind this proposal is that rents are currently controlled by the 1995 Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. Not all cities have rent control laws, but those that do, such as San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Jose, limit how much a landlord can increase rents each year. The age of the units limited and the rent of new units produced. Local control boards are paid by fees from the landlords. Rental housing is expensive in California. Renters typically pay 50% more for housing than in other states. And some rents are more than double the national average because of a continual shortage of housing units in California. Competition increases rents. Proposition 21 allows rent control on more properties. Cities and counties can apply controls to most housing more than 15 years old, but not on single-family homes, a second home, or duplexes. Localities can limit how much a landlord can increase rents when a new renter moves in, but they must allow increases up to 15% over 3 years. And it also would codify the new state law allowing landlords a fair rate of return. So the pros on this, the people who are in favor of it, argue that renters need protection of California's expensive rental market, that it builds protection for new housing and owners of only 2 properties, and it guards against increased homelessness. Proposition 21 is supported by Renters and Homeowners United, a PAC, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, the Democratic Party, and some unions. And its financial support totals a little over $28 million. It's another one that's drawing a lot of money. It gets its editorial support from the LA Times. The arguments against it are that the most controls worsen the housing crisis, It reduces private builder incentive to build more housing, and it reduces property owner values, therefore local tax revenues. Proposition 21 is opposed by 4 different coalitions of apartment owners and some veterans, senior, and social justice advocates. And it's mainly supported by the California Apartment Association and other PAC. The financial support for this one totals about 25 million. So it's pretty much in line with the first for the other side. And they get their editorial opposition for passage of this from the Orange County Register, the Bakersfield Californian, the Mercury News, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Are there questions on this one?
I see one question. Is there really any evidence that rent controls inhibit the building of new housing?
Building of new housing is really difficult to do anyway in the moderate and low income categories. We don't seem to have that problem in the upper level, but we do in the affordable housing, which is where the rents come in. And it's really hard to get an accurate count on this. Both sides are arguing that one side says it doesn't and the other side says it does. So I guess we all have to make our own judgment on it. I've been in housing for a long time and I can't figure it out either. So I don't have a definite answer on that. You'll have to make your own decision.
Another question, does it prohibit local rent control instead of statewide?
Yes, it's only, localities have to institute their own rent control programs. So most of them have only been in the large cities so far. But if a locality or even a city or a county, I guess, could do it, but they would have to do it for their own rental market. And it would only apply to their locality, their jurisdiction. Did that answer the question that was asked?
I think it does.
Would you read it again so I make sure I understand what they were wanting to know?
Does it prohibit local rent control instead of statewide?
No, there is a statewide standard, but this does apply only to localities. So if your city didn't put in a rent control program, then it just wouldn't have any effect at all.
And then it says, I'm getting lots of flyers against this measure from veteran groups. Do you know why?
No, but I'm actually kind of surprised, and that's why I brought out that the money for both sides are almost even, 28 million and for it and 25 million against it. But I've been getting those flyers too, and I don't know why we're only hearing from one side when, you know, in flyers anyway, when they both raised about the same amount of money from PACs.
Right. It looks like Alan is holding up a say no on 21 flyer, but also another question says, hasn't Arcata already instituted some form of local rent control to avoid mobile home or home rental increases?
You know, I'm ashamed to say that I haven't followed that mobile home. There was a real lot of activity about raising rents in mobile homes because they cater to people who don't have a lot of money for housing, and they have no control over the land that they sit on. And I don't know what the final outcome was on that. Maybe there's somebody from Arcata who knows more about it than I.
I don't see any other, wait, here's one real quick. On Old Arcata Road, mobile home parks they did, so.
Okay. I know it quieted down, but I don't know. I don't remember seeing the final resolution on it.
I think that's the questions.
Yeah, wait. Kim?
Go ahead, Margaret.
Someone asked, is there any evidence that Proposition 20 will divert money from other programs? And the reading that I had available, that was not addressed. So I have, so as far as I know, I don't know. One was presented in the literature that I read.
Okay. Thanks for going back on that one. I did have that one saved to bring up later.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you. That's all the questions right now. Nancy, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Prop 22, and this one you've seen a lot of literature on. It exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. And that is a very shorthand to say that it removes app-based drivers from the category of being an employee and allows them to remain independent contractors. So currently, in 2018, the California Supreme Court ruled that that most workers should be classified as employees, and there's all sorts of qualifications to for the company to prove to exempt them from that. And then 2019, the legislature passed AB 5, and that expanded that Supreme Court ruling, adding mandatory minimum wage, sick leave, and basic employee paid benefits. And since AB 5 passed, the state says that the rideshare and delivery companies obviously need to be have their drivers be employees, but the companies did not agree with that, and they have maintained and kept their drivers as independent contractors. And so the state attorney general filed suit against these companies to force them to comply with AB 5 and hire them as drivers, and that suit is still pending. So the proposition would exempt the rideshare and delivery drivers from the current state law that requires them to be employees and allow them to be independent contractors. And again, this is the question that is before the court, the suit that was filed by the Attorney General. So this proposition would come into play if the Attorney General prevails, wins that case, and the court finds that the drivers are supposed to be employees. This proposition would come in and say, we've got an exemption by Prop 22. So right now, employees get minimum wage plus overtime, and or the drivers would get, as employees, would get the minimum wage, and they would get paid during their waiting time, and they would get breaks and sick leave paid, and they would have employee benefits such as the expensive Social Security and Medicare contributions, and they get unemployment and workers' comp. They would get, as employees, they would have to work shifts and mandatory hours. And if this proposition passes and that they become independent contractors, then their conditions would not fall under that law. But the proposition has some fine print, or sort of fine print, that says, boy, you'll get 120% of the minimum wage, but only for driving time. And those who drive more than 15 hours a week would get a stipend toward medical insurance, as well as some replacement of your income if you're injured on the job. And as independent contractors, you'd be able to be flexible to set your own hours for when and where and how much you work. So again, if Prop 15 passes, or 22 passes, the drivers would remain independent contractors. They could decide when and how much to work, and they would get some benefits that are included in this proposition. If you vote no, the companies would have to hire the employees, the drivers as employees, and the drivers would have less choice about when and where and how much to work. But they would get those standard benefits that businesses must provide employees. So it's also worthy to note, written into this proposition, that if it cannot be amended or tweaked by the legislature or without 7/8 of the vote of the legislature, was a very high threshold. So what's the fiscal effect? Well, if passed and drivers remain independent contractors, the effect on state income tax would be minor. But there would be a fiscal effect in that the costs associated with these rideshare companies would increase because they'd be paying a lot more employer costs for their employees. And so then the fees would likely be raised to use these. And then the demand is supposed to be, would decrease due to the decreased fees. Anyway, the bottom line for our tax situation is negligible for the company and the stock and the value of the company. There would be an effect, but there would also be a higher demand for drivers if those fees did not go up, and they would likely earn more money. So supporters say, let me get over here. Supporters say that Prop 22 would improve delivery and rideshare by requiring companies to provide these new benefits and expands public safety protections. And basically, the supporters say it pretty much is just what the law provides for employees in many ways. And supporters say by a 4-to-1 margin, drivers prefer to work as independent contractors. They have other jobs or obligations or health issues. You know, they include your parents who want flexible schedules and students who want to earn money between classes, retirees who support their fixed incomes, military spouses who move frequently, and families struggling with California's high cost of living. Proponents also say that it keeps the app-based transportation and delivery service safe, affordable, and accessible. It says it saves jobs. When millions are struggling, 80% of the drivers work less than 20 hours per week and have time for other obligations. So, who supports this proposition? It's got editorial support from the San Francisco Chronicle, San Jose Mercury News, and the East Bay Times. California Small Business Association supports it, as does the NAACP, the Peace Officers Association, the Hispanic Council on Aging, the Senior Advocates League, and the Independent Drivers Alliance of California. Now, as far as financially supporting the passage of this proposition, more contributions have been made for this to pass this proposition than any pros or cons on the ballot. They total about 183 million, and 80% of that 83 million has come from Lyft, Uber, and DoorDash. Opponents say Prop 22 would replace the basic protections with lower benefits to save company costs. App-based rides and drive delivery companies are largely headquartered in California. In total, they're worth about as much as Ford, General Motors, and Fiat Chrysler combined. These are major companies. Opponents say current law does not limit driver flexibility, and they say a majority of Uber and Lyft drivers work 30 or more hours per week. Uber, Lyft, Instacart, and DoorDash, the companies wrote this proposition, and they're spending millions on it to increase their profits. They lost in court, and they're trying to buy their way into deregulation. Prop 22 is all about money. It's not about helping the drivers. And billion-dollar companies shouldn't get to pick and choose the laws that they follow or write their own. Now, who are these supporters? The International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the Service Employees International Black Women for Wellness Action Project, California Labor Federation, and several other labor unions. And this one also, to defeat it, $7 million has been spent, which is a considerable amount compared to the other propositions. Are there any questions?
Yes, there are several questions.
Oh dear.
One, and the first question I believe you answered, it asks, do changes to Prop 22 require the legislature to approve change with the 7/8 or 87% vote? And I think that you did say yes to that.
Yes, that is, I actually read it in the multi-page document filed.
And then there's one comment that says, I'm amazed that this wasn't expanded to include deliverers of newspapers. And then the next question is, the next two questions are essentially the same as, how is this industry different than taxi or limo drivers? And are those drivers, are taxi drivers, considered independent contractors, or are they considered employees?
Taxi cab drivers, you know, I think they have to be under a license, a medallion, so I think they are mostly employees, but this is not addressed in this proposition. This is app-based transportation and delivery companies. So this is a very specific universe.
Those are the only questions.
Okay, and believe it or not, I'm going to go right on to Prop 23. We're seeing kidney dialysis again. We saw it last time. We're going to see it, last election, we'll see it again. So the question is, should kidney dialysis clinics be required to have a licensed physician on site during treatment hours? And also, in the finer print, is should the California Department of Public Health's responsibilities increase to oversee the clinics reporting of dialysis-related infections? And should clinics be prohibited from refusing care to patients based on source of payments? So back in November 2018, Prop 8 sought to cap the profits of private dialysis companies. It was defeated. This proposition is sort of a simplified and reshuffled version of Prop 8. In California, there are at least 70,000 people undergoing dialysis treatment for end-stage renal disease, and they must receive dialysis to survive. Approximately 600 licensed dialysis clinics operate in California. 2 multinational for-profit corporations own or manage nearly 3/4 of them. The revenues are over $3 billion. So most of dialysis is paid for by Medicare and Medi-Cal. And these government programs, they pay a fixed rate, and it's established by regulation, and it's close to the cost of the treatment. And the rest of people that are covered by private insurance, their payments are negotiated with each provider. So this includes many of our California employees and retirees. On average, the rates negotiated by the private insurance companies are multiple times higher than those paid by Medicare and Medi-Cal. So the burden of the cost falls on the non-Medicare and Medi-Cal users. So according to this proposition, you have to have at least 1 physician on site during all treatment hours. And there's some exemptions for the shortage of doctors, exemptions for a year. You can use a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. Also, this proposition requires the same level of care to all patients, regardless of whether treatment is paid by private insurance or the government program. This proposition requires that information about patient infections go to the State Department of Public Health with penalties for non-reporting or inaccurate reporting. And this proposition requires the notification and consent from the state health department before closing or reducing the services. So some of these requirements were already partially in play, because to get federal funding for the Medicare patients, the clinics had to have a board certified medical doctor about 25% of the time on site. And the infections were already being reported to the federal National Health Care Network or Safety Network. The fiscal effect. Now, the fiscal effect on the data reporting to go to the state instead of just the national, that wouldn't have any significant cost change. But the requirement to have a doctor on site during all treatment would increase each clinic's annual cost by several $100,000, and it would increase the healthcare costs to state and local governments if the clinics negotiate for that higher reimbursement rate. Or the clinics may choose to close, and patients will have to receive treatment at a more expensive facility such as the hospital. or the companies may choose to stay where they are and with their current negotiations and just make lower profits. So supporters say that patients should have the right to a physician on site when dialysis is being provided, because dialysis is dangerous. It's a dangerous procedure, and many clinics in California have been cited for failure to maintain proper standards of care. The reporting of and transparency of infection rates to the state health department, which would be published on their website, encourages clinics to improve quality. And strong protection should be provided to vulnerable patients when clinics close. This would also ensure that the dialysis companies do not use closures to pad their bottom line. Now, who supports this? The California Democratic Party and the California Labor Federation. It has over $5 million in contributions, and the contributions are mostly from the SEIU healthcare workers. The opponents say due to costly requirements, Prop 23 would force community dialysis clinics to cut services or close, threatening access and putting dialysis patients' lives at risk. Prop 13 would make our physician shortage worse, lead to more overcrowding in emergency rooms. It would take many physicians to dialysis clinics where they're not really needed. And the opponents also say dialysis clinics are already strictly regulated and provide high quality care. And the opponents of this measure are California Medical Association, American Nurses Association, NAACP, and the Latin Diabetes Association. And this is another proposition to note, that there's lots of money in support of the opponents. I mean, about 93 million has been already raised, and of that, 80% of that, about 86% of the 86 million, 80% of the 93 million comes from those two companies that make up that nearly 75% of the license for profit dialysis clinics. So we have another proposition with big money being spent. Are there any questions?
So far, the question that I see asks, do clinics get overseen by the same state department that watches over hospitals and rest homes?
I don't know that. I don't know whether, what agency, the breadth of all the agencies. I don't know that.
Nancy, it's Lorna. I have a question. I know one person that does dialysis at home. Would that shut down that aspect of it? Does anyone know?
No, this is mostly focusing on clinics. And so I don't have any medical background on what would allow a patient to be able to do that at home rather having to go to a clinic. I really don't.
And then another question asks, is there any, or is there real evidence that clinics would need to close if this was passed?
Well, there's evidence that their cost would go a lot higher, because the cost of putting a physician on site would significantly increase their costs. Now, their reaction, the private company's reaction to that increased cost was, you know, they're private companies, so what the alternatives given is that they would just negotiate and have to make up that cost through their private pay, or that they would, just do nothing and take the loss, which is pretty optimistic. But there is the threat of closure, which is, I think, one of the reasons why they are not going to be allowed to close without the permission of the California Department of Health. Because they still have to feel this, have to service these people that are on life-changing dialysis. So they're controlling that threat, I think, by putting those words in. Is that enough information?
I hope so. There are a couple other comments and questions. Another question is there any evidence of a need to have the physician on site?
Well, that's a perspective thing. If you were to read what the proponents say, they say that there's been health violations, and you know, I don't have access to verifying that, but I do feel like that to be able to get into the Secretary of State's legislative analysts paperwork, which I did look at, that there had to be some validity to it, because they do vet that. Whatever goes into that voter information pamphlet is vetted very carefully, and with lots of lawsuits. What was the rest of the question?
That was the question, if there was any evidence of a need. I do
For
see
physician?
that. Yeah.
So they've been functioning right now according to the law. They have to have if you're sent to dialysis, your primary care physician is supposed to be with you 1 day a month at the dialysis clinic. Now that's law, and how much that is being adhered to, I don't know. But as far as you know, the need for that, I think that's part of the debate.
And there is one comment from, it sounds like from somebody who has experienced it firsthand, and living with someone who went to one of these facilities. They would send her home and she would almost bleed out. It was horrific what she went through, and this person says they wish there was a doctor on site.
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't see any other questions on this question.
Okay, well then we'll move on, and we're going to talk, Judy Bennett's going to talk about privacy law, Prop 24. Unfortunately, it is so complex. Hopefully you can follow it. It's a very difficult one. Judy?
Okay, thanks, Nancy. I am unmuted, I think. Unlike my first proposition, 17, which I do want to interject at this point, which was parolees being able to vote. Someone had asked who is supporting 17 and who's against it. Well, the League of Women Voters is for Proposition 17, as is the state legislature. Harmoniously, they brought this forward to the voters. Who's against it is the Crime Victims United of California and the Election Integrity Project. And that's all I know about who's for and against. Okay, on to 24. So 24 is not simple, as Nancy said. It is a 52-page statute. It reads on your ballot as amends consumer privacy laws. 3 years ago, Alastair McTaggart, a San Francisco real estate developer, sat next to a Google executive at a dinner and was shocked to learn how much tech companies know about us. And since then, he's spent $5.5 million of his own money to create an initiative measure to guarantee consumer privacy. Proposition 24 is an initiative statute brought forth by petition signatures at the cost of over $43 million. Prop 24 permits more privacy for consumers, makes it more difficult for businesses to share information about individuals, and increases the maximum penalties for privacy violations against children under the age of 16. And it creates a new state agency that would work with the Department of Justice to make sure these privacy laws are enforced. Proposition 24 will increase state costs by at least $10 million annually, but it could bring in revenues if penalties are levied when data breaches occur. Few states protect individual privacy better than California. California is in the minority of states which constitutionally guarantee an explicit right of privacy. A yes vote will create a new state agency and increase the number of privacy laws that are already in place. A no vote says consumers would continue to have the privacy laws currently in place, and all enforcement would be done by the Department of Justice. Proponents say we need a new agency, the California Privacy Protection Agency, and that the new rules under this law are needed to protect our privacy and that of our children, and that it would make it easier for us to correct misinformation about ourselves. and businesses would not be able to share sensitive information about us, such as race, ethnicity, and health. Opponents say this statute was written behind closed doors with input from social media corporations, and that its sponsors ignored any input from 11 privacy and consumer rights groups. That it creates a pay for privacy world. You want privacy, you need to pay for it. And then a new state agency is unnecessary. And in fact, it lessens some of our privacy laws when traveling out of state with a phone, a computer, or a wearable device like an Apple Watch. Opponents feel we haven't had a chance to see how good our privacy laws really are since they just began in 2018. This is not a bad proposition. It's just not good enough and more complicated than necessary and would be costly for taxpayers. It is a confusing statute, and even looking at proponents and opponents is confusing. The NAACP is in favor of Prop 24, and the ACLU is against it. Big tech companies have been remarkably silent about their positions. So a yes vote will mean 52 more pages of privacy laws and the creation of a new state agency, the California Private Protection Agency, at a cost of more than $10 million a year. And a no vote keeps the laws we currently have and an opportunity to see if they are effective. So are there any questions?
There are no questions about this. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Would this measure prevent companies which are not based in California from sharing our information?
No, this is only a California measure.
Anyone else? I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Judy. And our last proposition, Prop 25, will be presented by Maggie Gordon.
Yes, 25 is a referendum on a law that replaced the money bail with a system based on public safety and flight risk. It was put on the ballot by petition signatories. A yes vote approves the law, and a no vote rejects the law. So if it is passed, it would eliminate release on bail, create a pretrial assessment service division, which would implement the system. The system would use validated risk assessment tools, which are algorithms that assign points to traits that determine the risk, and the total value would determine the condition of release. A low risk would mean immediate release except for domestic violence or failure to show 2 times or more. Medium risk would be release, detention, or a fine, and high risk would be detention. There would be automatic release for misdemeanors except for domestic violence and failure to show 2 times in the past year. There would be increased costs, possibly in mid-hundreds of millions of dollars annually for the new process for release from jail. There could be decreased county jail costs, possibly in the high tens of millions of dollars annually. A yes vote means that no one would be released based on bail, but released on their assessed risk, and no one would be charged fees as a condition of release. A no vote would mean that some people would pay bail and others would not, and fees would continue to be charged as a condition of release. The proponents feel that the current system favors rich defendants who can easily make bail. It keeps poor defendants and defendants of color in jail, and those found not guilty or not even charged may be stuck with large debts to pay off bail or fees. And proponents include the CMA, the Coalition of Justice Reform and Labor Organization, and aggregate contributions over $6 million. The opponents feel that the provisions would effectively result in more people being jailed. It would cost taxpayer hundreds of millions of dollars annually. It would overburden the court system and create a new bureaucracy. And they feel the assessment tools are discriminatory against poor defendants and defendants of color. Those that Opposed are the NAACP, United Latinos, and the Californians for Safer Communities, an American Bail Coalition, and aggregate contributions are over 7 million. Are there any questions?
And I just wanted to add to Maggie that this is the referendum, the one referendum that's on the ballot. It does mean that it had to come generated by the legislature, and it did have to go out and get petition signatures. But this is the one referendum from the legislature.
I don't see any questions about this proposition or this referendum. Do we want to go back and pick up the questions then that people have asked since we talked about each individual proposition?
Please, please.
I think Richard had a question about Prop 14. He said, Prop 71 was passed previous to Prop 14 and provided support for stem cell research. When federal support for stem cell research was not available due to ethical opposition to using fetal sources for stem cells, that support is no longer being blocked. I hope we will further discuss Prop 14 as part of this presentation. One of the arguments in favor is that the bond would be retired using revenue from the research, which is arguable. Another argument opposing this proposition is that costs arising from the pandemic constrain the ability of the state to take on further elective debt.
So to answer or to comment on some of that, yes, Proposition 71 was in 2004, and it gave researchers the right to conduct stem cell research. It sunsets. It's going to end, and Proposition 14 wants to extend what they are doing. There was a part of it that anything that any money that was made from new developments and anything that came, that, people started making money from, part of that went to the state. Some of it has gone. There was some payment made. The opponents say it wasn't. They didn't get the payments as promised. I think implying that they didn't make as much as they had thought they would. They hope to, but they think that there will be more still coming if they continue with this, with the research. The part about the economy and pandemic, there is no repayment on this for 5 years. So there won't be any new expense to the state until 2026, when repayments do start. So that was, I think, to protect the economy recovering from the pandemic before any new charges were made to it. Does that answer that question? Pretty complex.
Yeah, it seemed like it was more of a comment than a question. But Ann Kilbia has a question that is on the same prop, and it's beside the amount being named for brain illnesses, are amounts specified for research versus administration costs?
$1.5 billion is dedicated to the brain-related diseases, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and several other brain and mental nervous system diseases. Stroke, I think, is one of them, and several others. That is what is designated out of the 5.5 billion. The rest of it goes to stem cell research and includes training, research facility construction, and administrative costs.
Thanks, Byrd. Amy, I think you were going to talk a little bit more about Prop 15.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions on Prop 15. So there's a lot of confusion because the prop exempts agricultural land, but farmers have been putting out vote no because they're saying that this will trigger higher property taxes on agricultural related fixtures and improvements. I don't see anything that says that, but that is what they're saying. Also, I wanted to say, that the Prop 15 proponents are saying that the measure's opponents are using scare tactics, that studies show that landlords don't pass their current tax savings along to tenants, that they change market rate regardless of their own tax advantages. So a change in their tax rate shouldn't affect small businesses that rent space from them. That's what the proponents claim. And then I also just wanted to say who supports this and who opposed this, because I cut mine short. So the measure supporters include the state's Democratic and Green parties, Governor Newsom, Senators Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris, the Los Angeles and Oakland Unified School Districts, several county boards of supervisors, several teachers and nurses unions support the measure. The League of Women Voters of California supports Prop 15, the Sierra Club, and the ACLU. The opponents are the former Los Angeles mayor, I cannot say his name, Villaraigosa, and corporations such as Boston Properties, the Paramount Group, which is one of our largest ag groups, Columbia Property Trust. Organizations opposed to the measure include Americans for Tax Reform, the California Chamber of Commerce, the California NAACP State Conference, the California Small Business Association, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and the California Black Chamber of Commerce. So I hope that I had answered the questions.
Thanks, Amy.
Looks like we're ending right on time, but I would like to just, before we leave, I would like to remind people that the two pitfalls in your vote by mail are easily overcome. Number one pitfall is people forget to sign their envelope. Please remember to sign your envelope. And the second pitfall is that they may come in late. And we have them all right now, so it is suggested that you not only not be late, but make sure that they get in just as soon as you can. So I'm sorry, did I interrupt you, Kim? Just wanted to throw that in.
Oh, no, no, that's super important. So thank you for doing that. And I don't know how you all feel about staying on to answer the last few questions. I'm fine with staying on with that, but it's really up to you.
Kim, I just wanted to say that I noticed on the chats that someone thought that I inferred that Proposition 24 was written by social media. No, it wasn't written by social media. The writers got information and advice from them. And on page 71 of your, from the Secretary of State handbook, you will see that it says that they influenced how it is written, but they did not write it.
Right, I did see that, and actually you got right. I was just about to say that one, so perfect timing. And then there was one more question about Prop 24.
That's me, privacy.
Yeah, now I've lost it. Hold on, let me find it again. It is from Cheryl. Oh, is there any? Oh no, that was that one. Sorry, Prop 23 is the other one. Yeah, where Gary was asking, would Prop 23 limit access to treatment in rural areas?
Actually, this is basically focused on where the clinics are. So it's not, it may impact rural areas if there's a threat of closing a rural clinic, but right now I can't see anything that I would say would be infecting anything other than the existing ones.
And then there was one other question I saw on Prop 19, and it's the question was, do you know anything about the previous, and I think propositions is the word missing. You mentioned Prop 58, and so they were just wondering some more information about that.
58 is the one that allows the inheritance without renewing. And it's saying the opponent said that it would force the reassessment of the inherited property unless it's used as the new owner's principal residence within 1 year. And that particular part of the proposition would remove the earlier Proposition 58.
I can't really hear Byrd because the Rubens are chopping something.
Sorry.
Can I say that again?
Yes.
The opponents say that Prop 19 would force the reassessment of inherited property unless it is used as the new owner's principal residence within 1 year. And that would eliminate the earlier Proposition 58, which had to do with inheritance, and they could inherit it and it would not be reassessed. This is putting a limitation on not having it reassessed. Does that answer the question?
I think so. There are a lot of thank yous in the comments, but there are a couple of other little points that people and questions that people were asking. One question I see is on these bonds, is the interest rate based on the current rate, on today's current rates?
What, the 5.5 billion?
I think just in general on these bonds.
I don't know the answer to that. I would assume it probably is. From what I read, there's a great deal of information that's saying that interest rates are not going to rise for quite a while, but I don't know that, and I don't think anybody knows that for sure. So I would say it probably is, but it's quite a bit that's added. It's, you know, from 5.8 to 7.3. I mean, 5.5 to 7.8 is the increase that would be the increase, and it doesn't kick in until 2026, but the interest rate will be added before that.
I'll just interject there that this is a competitive bond market, and so the risk and return would be reflected in the rate and, you know, and their projections to the future. But it is a competitive market, so it almost by definition, given tax consequences and all, it would be their best estimate for their competitiveness.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you so much. There is one other question that I see here that it says regarding the mail-in ballot, there's a place to write your address on the back above the signature. Is that critical?
Yes, they want you to write your address in there too. That is critical, but maybe not fatal. Not signing it is fatal. They might be able to trace you back depending, but it is fatal not to sign it. You have to sign to vote, whether it's in person. The logic of that is, and this is your signature to vote when you're not in person. The signature is definitely required.
And then somebody asked about the link for tracking our ballots after they're mailed. And Amy, thank you for putting that that email address, or the where to track that is where'smyballot.sos.cal.gov. So that is in the comments in the chat. I think there's a lot of, again, thank you for, you know, a very useful presentation. Oh, would the League of Women Voters comment on their process for determining to not take a position on a proposition?
Well, any of us could jump in on it. When the league takes a position on a proposition, it has to correlate with what they have studied. And there may be a proposition there that's very timely and an important topic, but the league has not been able to study it, which is a study process which takes years. So we're not quick responders. So that would be the primary way. Byrd or Judy, anybody want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I want to add that the state league board looks at the positions that they have on the issue, and the state board has to agree on taking a position. If the board doesn't agree, they have no position on something. or no recommendation on a proposition. So it's you know, several layers of approvement that it has to go through.
Before the league can speak, right? They don't, it's not a flippant support or position against. The league really thinks it through.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I want to thank the League of Women Voters and our 6 participants for their study and their presentation today. We really appreciate it. It helps us all to contemplate what we're going to do in terms of voting. And we've gotten lots of good questions from the participants. And I want to let you know that next week we're going to have a discussion of financial literacy and changing technologies by AJ Gonzalez, who's the community manager of Umpqua Bank. And we're going to be exploring how evolving technologies are now or will soon affect the way we conduct our financial affairs. You will learn how credit cards, debit cards, cash and gift cards, internet banking, and smartphones may soon displace the cash economy if they haven't already. Find out what cryptocurrencies and blockchain systems are and what to expect in the future. So we hope to see you there next week. Meantime, vote. Vote now, but not often. Just once. And follow up on your vote to make sure there aren't any issues. So we have a great system. I'm no longer able to be a poll worker for obvious reasons. On the other hand, I know we have many in the younger generation that are stepping up to do that, and I presume millennials are doing that in Humboldt County as well. So thank you so much. Go vote.